Hello dear students, welcome to PNMRC High School e-learning. Today we are going to begin with our first chapter in economics. Name of chapter is Graphs in Economics. Before we begin with the chapter, let's have a brief introduction about the chapter. Economics analyzes and explains various economic events which occur in the real world. In order to make this analysis, statistical data is being provided by government, banks and even certain international organizations. Laypersons, that is common men, are not interested in any such discussions or analysis which are being made by experts. But in order to draw our attention to these certain events or economic changes, these changes are being presented by way of pictures so that the information may reach to us. Generally, pictures are of two types. First, that is diagrams, and second, that is graphs. Just like statistics, economics also classifies diagrams and graphs as two different types of pictures, and therefore economics uses this for different purposes. First of all, we are going to discuss about diagram. If we look at the meaning of diagram, it is said that a diagram is a representation of observable data by way of picture. In order to make this picture look neat and clean, scales and measurements are being used. However, thorough knowledge of statistics is not required to draw the diagram. A diagram is generally drawn for a discrete, that is a discontinuous frequency distribution. Its example has been illustrated over here. As you can see that on first side price is given and in the second demand is given. Now when we observe this, the price which is increasing and therefore the demand is continuously contracting. That means this is such a kind of data which is self-explanatory. A person is able to understand this data and no further information or no further clarification is required for this kind of data, and therefore laypersons do not require any kind of statistical information or statistical knowledge in order to draw or understand a diagram. Generally, a diagram is used by advertising companies to draw attention, by the government to provide information, and even by social organization to spread awareness. Now we shall look into the second kind of picture, that is a graph. So first of all, talking about meaning of graph, a graph is also a representation of observable data by way of picture. That means a graph or a diagram, both are a representation of observable data by way of picture. Then what is the difference between a diagram and a graph? So generally, a graph is drawn for data which is not self-explanatory. Just like a diagram was drawn for such a kind of data which was self-explanatory, but a graph is usually drawn for such kind of data which is not self-explanatory. Further, a diagram was drawn for a frequency distribution which was discontinuous or for a discrete frequency distribution. However, a graph is drawn for a continuous frequency distribution. Example of continuous frequency distribution has been stated over here. As you can see in the example, in first column there is classes of marks and in second column there is number of students, that is your frequency. Therefore, we may say that a graph is generally drawn for a complex statistical information. Now, in order to simplify this statistical information, use of statistical tools is made. And because statistical tools are being used, therefore a person needs to possess thorough or detailed knowledge of statistics in order to draw these graphs. Moreover, because a graph can extend over more than one quadrants, out of the four quadrants, that is x and x dash and y dash, therefore a graph cannot be drawn without taking appropriate measurements. As the name itself suggests that it is a graph, so generally a graph is drawn on a graph paper. Unlike a diagram, a graph is generally used by researchers and educationists, and generally a graph is not used to convey information to laypersons or to the general public. So students, after getting information about diagrams and graphs, we shall now look into the importance of diagrams and graphs in economics. First of all, the study of the subject of economics, which is generally found to be complicated or difficult, can be made easy as well as less confusing by means of using diagrams and graphs. Moreover, trends of certain economic variables over different years can be observed by means of preparing a single graph or a diagram. Also, its trend, that whether it is increasing or it is decreasing, can also be presented by means of using diagrams and graphs. Say for example, we may observe the literacy rate in India, that whether literacy rate is increasing or whether it is decreasing. Similarly, changes occurring in various sectors of the economy, maybe agriculture sector or even industrial sector, can also be understood by means of using diagrams and graphs. When a comparison is to be drawn for distribution of some economic variables between groups or classes, or even between regions, sectors or time periods, then it can be done by means of using these diagrams and graphs. Say for example, we may compare inflation rate of India with rate of inflation of some other country. Similarly, growth rate of population of India can be compared with growth rate of population of some other country by means of using these diagrams and graphs. Moreover, in order to present any information in an easygoing manner, the time and effort of the presenter in explaining those concepts as well as that of the reader to understand these economic aspects can be saved. Lastly, when certain difficult but important principles of economics are to be made understood, then it can be easily done with the help of diagrams and graphs. Say for example, last year what you have studied about concept of expansion and contraction of demand and supply. Like we have studied that in case of demand there is an inverse relationship between price and demand, and therefore it was easily presented by means of preparing a negative curve. Negative curve itself presented that as the price was increasing, so the demand was contracting. Similarly, we have also understood about the concept of price elasticity of demand by preparing various kinds of pictures and thus understanding the concept of price elasticity of demand. Not only this, even trends of macroeconomic parameters can be easily clarified by means of preparing time series graph. The short run and long run fluctuations in the agriculture sector or maybe the industrial sector can be calculated by means of time series method, and their trend can be easily presented by means of preparing time series graphs. Now, talking about the last but the most important topic, that is aspects to be considered while drawing a diagram or a graph. The purpose of drawing pictures is to make analysis simpler and more effective, and therefore following points are to be considered. First one, choice of type of diagram or graph and their presentation. There are various types of diagrams and various kinds of graphs which we are going to study later on in this chapter. The user must select right type of diagram or graph so as to make a picture more effective. Say for example, for a similar type of data, either a pie diagram or a bar diagram can be drawn. Second point, that is clarity. A picture must look neat and clean. When various components of a picture are to be shown, then different colors or shades may be used. Say for example, while representing the data regarding literacy rate among males and females, various colors or shades can be used to denote literacy rate in males and females in a group or a clustered bar diagram. Third point, that is scales and measures. We have already seen that scales and measures are used while drawing a diagram, while a graph cannot be drawn without taking appropriate measurements. To make a picture look appropriate in size, scales are to be taken in accordance with the size of the data. When the size of data is too large, say in thousands or in lakhs, then it is necessary to take appropriate scales so as to present the data in a single diagram or graph. For example, 1 centimeter is equals to 1000 units or 1 centimeter is equals to 10,000 units. Fourth point, that is representation of axes. Both the x-axis and y-axis must clearly mention the details they represent. If x-axis represent years or regions, then it must be specified. Also, the variable which is represented on y-axis must be stated. Fifth point, data table and source of data. Diagrams and graphs are always drawn from data table, and therefore it becomes necessary to mention the source from which the data has been obtained. By this, the picture becomes more reliable and authentic. For example, if a diagram is drawn regarding growth rate of population in India, then the source of this data, that is the census of India, along with the year, must be mentioned. No picture drawn without data table and its source can become reliable. Last point, that is method of calculating the data. When a picture is drawn from data which is not self-explanatory, then it is to be simplified by using statistical tools. Whatever statistical formula is being used must be stated briefly. So, with this I end my topic for today. In our next session, we will discuss about types of diagrams and graphs. Meanwhile, kindly refer your textbooks and also try to enumerate more points of difference between diagrams and graphs. Thank you.